It's the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Presented by Climate Power Education Fund. Does big oil care about our streets flooding or our home burning? Not according to an ExxonMobil top lobbyist.
Did we aggressively fight against some of the science? Yes. We were looking out for our shareholders.
They care about profits, not people. Learn more at polluters.exposed.
You are Locked On Kings, your daily podcast on the Los Angeles Kings. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey Kings fans, happy Thursday. You're listening to Locked On Los Angeles Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, and today's show is brought to you by rockauto.com. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. Visit rockauto.com and tell them Locked On sent you. So earlier this week, we did a show where we talked with Jared Brown, who is the head scout for Draft Pro Hockey, which is, of course, an independent scouting service looking at prospects. In our conversation earlier this week, we talked about Brandt Clark, who he also introduced us to a little bit before the draft. We got to learn a little bit about him then. We go more in depth in the previous show. So we hear about Brandt Clark, and we also hear about Francesco Pinelli, who was the Kings' second-round draft pick, or at least the first pick in the second round. On today's show, we finish out the rest of the draft by looking at the other two players the Kings selected, and we get a little bit of a look at what is going on elsewhere in the league. Who were the winners and the losers? What other teams did great jobs to restock their prospect pools in this year's draft? So we are going to take a look at that right now. We're going to talk with Jared Brown of Draft Pro Hockey, and we're going to take a look at more draft picks of the Los Angeles Kings. Now turn to Europe, where the Kings pulled their next two draft picks, and they made an old school draft pick. I think this one seems like a pick that Dean Lombardi would have made, which is what I thought of when I saw this. They turned to Samuel Hellenius, who is a very large Finnish forward. His dad is also a former NHL player. Let's just say maybe not the most skilled, but the most physical in terms of his father, at least. And he kind of plays with, from what we've seen, the same sort of snarl in his game, but maybe a little more law-abiding, let's say. What's your take on this pick? Where do you think that he projects at in terms of an NHL player? And just what can you share with us about him?
Well, I think what they really got and what they went for with this selection here was maybe a safer pick. I think definitely they could have gone with for a player with higher upside and maybe a higher ceiling, but I think they wanted to play their cards a little safer, and they went with a player in Hellenius. I don't know if I'm saying it correctly. I could never say his name right. But I think they went with a player that they see having definite NHL potential and having an NHL career. And I think where he projects is, and it may not be, flattering or lovely to hear, but I think he's going to be a bottom six center at the NHL level. And I think he can be he can play that role style. He can be a checker. Obviously he's got that size, and it's 6'6" and around maybe 200 pounds. Just wait until he adds another 15 pounds to that frame, and he's going to be even, he can play a heavier game and even better. So I think this was more of a safer pick by LA. And the type of player that he really is that he's a two-way centerman. Like you said, he's not the most skilled. He's polar opposite from someone like Francesco Pinelli or even Brandt Clark, where don't expect him to flash you with some dazzling hands. He's pretty good in tight and around the net, and I think that's one thing that's really good, and especially with that size, is he's not afraid to drive through traffic or play in the dirty areas, and obviously that's something that you would want with a player his size. but he's a two-way player. He's really, he's a smart and reliable defensive player. I think you're just going to get a guy who can bring a physical edge and impact the game from a physical standpoint, and has a bit of puck skills to help him finish. But I'm not going to bet on him to be a high producer, even in a bottom six role, if he makes the NHL.
Yeah, and I think that's a thing that there's always kind of talk of, fans hold prospects way too dear, and they think every prospect is going to turn out to be a superstar, and they're all supposed to be top line guys, but ultimately at the end of the day, the Kings won Stanley Cups with guys like, Jordan Nolan and Dwight King, and, Cal Clifford was a high draft pick, but he, had his role on the team and he knew what it was. Yep. So, I kind of saw him as one of those picks of helping fill out that, bottom six depth of, you need the guy who is going to go stand in front of the net and let things bang in off of him and be the guy to smash someone in the corner and let the actual elite players do their jobs. It felt very, I saw how big he was, and I was like, is Dean Lombardi secretly doing this draft? Like, where is he?
And the other thing with, maybe, and there maybe some fans thought LA may have drafted him too high, but I think important to keep in mind that LA only had four picks in the draft. So they wanted to go with a little bit of a safer pick, and they saw a player who they think has a high flooring and will make the NHL as a bottom six center. And I think you said it perfectly. You need those role players to win a cup or just to have success. And sometimes players, and not sometimes actually, I should say most of the time, that in the draft, players are very skilled or offensive producing at their junior levels or wherever they're playing, but then when they make the NHL, they have to make the transition to play a role kind of style or be a checker and all that. And I think Helenius already maybe knows his role. He already knows what he is, and that's something that is a very good thing.
It's going to be interesting to see. And the Kings traded up pretty much in all, except for Brandt Clark. They traded up in pretty much all their picks to get, to get a guy who they wanted. And the Kings, I think, are in a very interesting position of having about 1 million prospects. And they, at this point, they can afford to, trade a third and a fifth to move up a couple of spots because there's just so many of them at this point.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that's a smart, asset management thing to do, and you have a prospect pool that is, your cupboards are full of them, and at every position, really. If you really want to get your player in the draft, like, LA wanted to do, then fork up a fifth rounder, fork up a sixth rounder or whatever, so you get that player. And you already have a deep prospect pool, the deepest in the NHL, and maybe even by far. So, LA can afford to do that.
After this, we look at the final draft pick that the Kings made in this year's draft. First, though, rockauto.com is here for you when you need to fix your car. There is basically every day, it feels like a new variety of car is coming out. Like, I'll be on the road and I'll see a new version of my own car, and I'll be like, well, where'd that come from? It's basically impossible these days to keep up with all the different types of cars, makes, models, everything that are out there. And it's impossible for stores to keep up with carrying everything they could possibly carry in person in the real world. So shopping for car parts can be super frustrating because you go to the store, they don't have it, they have to order it online, they, try to argue with you about what you're ordering. It's just a really frustrating experience. You could save yourself time, money, heartache by going to rockauto.com. It is super easy to find your own car. You can search by the make, the model, the year, and it'll tell you all the parts that they have available that work for your car. Prices are always reliably low, so not only is it easy, not only is it convenient, but it is also going to save you some money. So go to rockauto.com right now. Check it out. They have basically everything you could ever possibly need for your car. Explore their website today to find the solution to all of your auto parts needs. Go to rockauto.com right now. See all the parts available for your car or your truck. Write Locked On in the How Did You Hear About Us box so that they know we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. rockauto.com.
David Harrison here, the Locked On Washington Football Team podcast, celebrating with you a 21 grain salute to a less boring sandwich thanks to Dave's Killer Bread. I don't know about you guys, but when I eat pizza, I eat it for the toppings, not the crust. And when I eat a sandwich, it's for what's inside the bread, not for the bread. But when I throw a sandwich on 21 whole grains and seeds, thin sliced bread from Dave's Killer Bread, it is the epitome of addition by subtraction. That thin sliced bread lets me focus on what's inside the sandwich, but also adds to the sandwich with killer taste, killer texture, killer nutrition, a subtle sweetness, and a seed-coated crust. Dave's Killer Bread is America's #1 organic bread for a reason. It tastes so stinking good. Dave's Killer Bread is made with the highest quality organic and non-GMO ingredients and is power-packed with whole grains, fiber, and protein. Visit daveskillerbread.com to learn more and look for Dave's Killer Bread in the bread aisle of your local grocery store.
With their final pick that they also traded up to get, they turned to Russia, which I feel like people always have feelings about in general, but they selected another defenseman to close out their draft. They chose Kirill Kirsanov, hoping maybe that they could confuse him with Kirill Kaprizov. Not sure, but he is a defenseman who they've added to their draft or their prospect pool. What can you tell us about him? I know that prospects out of Russia are always a little harder to evaluate. People don't always get to see them that much, but what do you know about him?
Well, he actually played at the last World Juniors for Team Russia, and I was really impressed with him, more so than another Russian prospect that was on that team. He actually went higher than him, Danil Chayka. Kirsanov and Chayka were both on that team, and I thought Kirsanov had the better tournament, although Chayka, arguably is the better prospect. But I think what I noticed the most about Kirsanov was how just calm he is as a defenseman. He doesn't look like, I have a funny saying, and some people, laugh at me when I say this, but I watch a player like Kirsanov, I watch a defenseman like that, and I say it almost seems like he doesn't have a pulse. Like everything is just in control. He's calm. He doesn't look like he's panicked at any point during the game. And I think that's what you're getting with Kirsanov. And I think that is so important to have as a defenseman for the NHL level. The game is so quick. You got to be calm in those under pressured situations or in those tight spots. You got to be calm. You have to have a low panic point. And I think that's what Kirsanov has. I think he's a pretty good skating defenseman. You're going to he uses a lot of power in his stride to make it effective. It's maybe not the most smoothest, but it is pretty powerful. And I think his defensive game is strong because of his skating and how he can, close up on the rush and defend it that way and keep his gaps up tight. So I think it was a pretty good pick. Honestly, it's just, like you said, and Russian prospects can always be somewhat, or maybe not even somewhat, but they can be polarizing because of when they come over to the NHL, and just their decisions to stay in Russia, which obviously would play a factor in picking a Russian high or low, and obviously we saw that with Kaprizov.
And he is at least playing with St. Petersburg, which I feel like is a bit of a double-edged sword because we've seen prospects come through there before that, if you're not a superstar, suddenly you find yourself getting 3 minutes a night and, no one knows what's up with you. But it is also one of the best teams in the league. So if he gets regular minutes, he'll at least be playing on a team that is, going to take him on a playoff run, is going to get him maybe a little better quality than some of the other teams. But we've certainly seen the handful of Kings prospects over in Russia who, we're like, what are they up to? They haven't played in a month. And it's because they're like, oh, we've scratched him for this other guy because, that guy's more important to us.
Yeah, and that's one of the biggest things, and it's sometimes the biggest problem with developing players overseas. Even I think Lucas Raymond was having that issue in his draft year, even though he went 4th overall to the Detroit Red Wings in was it 2020. He was playing and he was up with his top SHL team, but he was getting maybe 4 minutes a night or literally 1 minute. And it's just like, well, how are they going to develop? I get it. They're up with the big team and they can practice with them and they can see a professional lifestyle, but that's, like they also have to play to develop. And I think, with Kirsanov, even though he was a late birthday and he was just a late birthday, like he was pretty close to being eligible for the 2020 draft. He got time. He didn't play. I don't know what his minutes and how much he averaged playing up with St. Petersburg in the KHL, but I know he played a decent amount. Like he played a good quality amount of games, and I think that shows the level of maturity that he has in his game, which is again goes to the calming presence he brings to it. So I think that's a good thing to have, especially for Kirsanov, but I completely agree with you. It's he's you want him to play more because so he can actually develop, but sometimes or not sometimes, obviously we have no control over that. We're not over in St. Petersburg banging on the door telling him play Kirsanov 20 minutes.
Right. I mean, if we could, a lot of things would change, I think, if we could, go knock on that door. Thank you for breaking down the Kings draft picks and helping us learn a little bit more about them, especially the 2 guys currently playing over in Europe, because we won't get a whole bunch of chances to see them. After this, Jared tells us all about the rest of the league, what they're up to, who were the winners and the losers of this year's draft. First, though, Built Bar is not a loser, it's a winner. Built Bar is the best tasting protein bar that is out there on the market. It tastes delicious. It doesn't taste like you're eating something healthy. It doesn't taste like you're eating a protein bar. It tastes like you're eating something that's candy. It comes in a ton of great flavors, including mint brownie, salted caramel, German chocolate, and many more. If you are someone who can't make up your mind or who doesn't want to have just the same flavor all the time, you are in luck because Built Bar also offers a variety box. So you can try each of the flavors they have available and then, make your own decision as to what your favorite Built Bar is. They are low in calories, low in sugar, high in fiber, high in protein, and really all around good for you. You can go right now to built.com, see everything they have available. Use promo code LOCKED15 and you'll get 15% off your order. That's promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at built.com. We also want to tell you about BetOnline because it is the fastest and easiest way to bet on all of your sports action. If you're into baseball, if you're into hockey, which I hope you are because you're here, if it's football or basketball or fighting or horse racing, maybe they have horse racing, I don't know. You can go to betonline.ag and find out though, because they have news, odds, information, bonuses, contests, and much more for whatever your favorite sport is. So head on over to BetOnline on your laptop or your mobile device and check it out. Get into the game and sign up today. You can receive a 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit when you use the promo code LOCKEDON. That is betonline.ag, promo code LOCKEDON. BetOnline, your online sportsbook experts. I did want to close today by just sort of taking a general look at the NHL and how you thought this draft did. So who were your winners and losers of this year's draft, so we can scope out who maybe we need to keep an eye on?
Well, first off, the first losers, the losers of the draft were the Montreal Canadiens, and it's just absolutely, disgusting and a lack of human rights to draft Logan Mailloux. So I was really, really disappointed. I was I was watching it with my girlfriend, and Marc Bergevin is announcing that pick in French, and then I heard London Knights, and I'm thinking, who on the London Knights would go that high? And I hear his name, and I'm like, oh my God, like that's so the losers of the draft go to the Montreal Canadiens, regardless of, and I actually like some of their other picks on day two, but they are the losers, and they get an F rating. But I think the draft in the first round played out actually it wasn't as surprising as I think maybe some people thought. I think the three surprising picks were obviously Logan Mailloux to Montreal Canadiens, Nolan Allen to Chicago, and to obviously one of the big one was Tyler Boucher to Ottawa at 10th overall. We had him, draft throw. We had him around, I think, the 60s. And I didn't really think Tyler Boucher was going to go that high at all. But so he did. So I thought the first round, regardless of that, played pretty normal, and there was not a lot of huge surprises. There were some players that definitely slipped, like Wallstad and Fabien Loussel. They slipped a lot farther down than I really would have expected, and I think that was a huge mistake by other teams. But other than that, I thought that it was pretty good. I thought Anaheim, as much as maybe LA fans may not want to hear this, but I thought Anaheim had a pretty good draft. They went with some higher upside players, but yeah, it was a pretty, interesting draft. I think there was a lot of names that got called that I didn't even really think would get called, or I didn't even know their names. So, but I think that's what, we should have came to expect from a year where a pandemic hit these leagues so hard. So, yeah, I would say the draft was surprising, but the first round was a little bit, predictable and not as surprising.
Well, I feel like, yeah, we expecting this draft to be a normal draft, you just knew that there were going to be teams who are like, well, I saw this guy 14 times, so
yeah,
we're just gonna pick him. It's fine.
Yeah. Well, and honestly, at the end of the day, and it's the thing I like the most about scouting, is it's an opinion based profession. You stick to your guns, and if you really like a player, like obviously, let's take Ottawa for example. They saw something in Tyler Boucher that I didn't, and others at Draft Pro didn't. I think if you gravitate towards a player so much, then bang your fist on the table to pick him, and that's what is either going to make you look like a bright and intelligent and a great scout, or maybe doesn't work out and you're looking elsewhere for work. But I think that's what I love about scouting so much, is that and it's something that you need to be strong with your opinions. You need to be confident in them. So seeing someone like Tyler Boucher that I had going maybe late second round go 10th overall was surprising to me, but I appreciate it because it means Ottawa really sees something in him and they're sticking to their guns, and they didn't want to take a chance of him not being available with their second round picks. So they went with him at number 10. So yeah, I think we'll see how that pick pans out.
Well, I think stick to your guns for what you believe in is a good life lesson, not just for picking your favorite prospects. So I think that is a pretty great note to end things on today. Thank you so much for joining the show. It's a little too early to think about next year's draft, but we'll have you on once we have to start thinking about that, once we know where the Kings are going to be, how good they're going to be, if we're going to be talking about who's going to be going in the top 10 or not. We'll be glad to talk with you again. So for people who want to keep up with your work, covering scouting and everything, where can they find you and all your work online?
Yeah, so you can follow me at JaredBrown97 on Twitter. And if everyone else would like to, they can visit draftprospectshockey.com, where I'll be posting articles, as well as everyone else on our staff will be posting articles throughout the course of this upcoming hockey season, so they can tune into that.
All right. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and opinions on the Kings' newest draft class, and appreciate your time.
Thanks so much for having me.
That's it for today. Thank you all so much for listening. Thank you to Jared for joining me on the show. I was really glad to get to break down the Kings draft with him today, and hopefully we'll be hearing from him more in the future whenever we got to start thinking more about prospects for next year, which is going to happen before we know it. Later this week, by later this week, I guess I mean tomorrow, we'll take a look at what is going on in the NHL, what's been happening this summer as we all sit around basically and wait for hockey to start up again. We'll just take a look at the league and some Kings news that has happened fairly recently. We'll take a look at that. That is it for today. Thank you for listening. If you haven't already, do make sure you're subscribed to this show. So whatever podcast app you're listening to this in, hit the follow button or the subscribe button or whatever it calls it, so you can make sure to never miss an episode. If you're enjoying what you're hearing, tell your friends all about it and leave a rating or a review on iTunes or whatever your podcast app is. Go leave us a big 5-star review and tell people how much you're enjoying learning all about the Kings here on Locked On Los Angeles Kings. Until next time, this has been Locked On Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
One more big NBA trade before everyone starts paying attention to football. Here's what our local experts are locked on today. The Los Angeles Clippers have reportedly traded Patrick Beverley, Rajon Rondo, and Daniel Oturu to the Memphis Grizzlies for guard Eric Bledsoe. Get local expert analysis on both sides of the deal today on Locked On Clippers and Locked On Grizzlies. San Diego Padres All-Star Fernando Tatis Jr. returned from the DL with a 2-home run, 4 RBI performance in an 8-2 win over the Arizona Diamondbacks. Will his return be enough to get the Padres season back on track? That's today on the Locked On Padres podcast with local expert Javier Reyes. It's NFL Preview Week on the Locked On Today podcast. Get an insider's look at the Carolina Panthers, the San Francisco 49ers, and the LA Chargers. The Locked On Today podcast. All the sports news you need in under 20 minutes. Follow Locked On Today, wherever you get podcasts. Local experts on the biggest stories. It's the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, I'm Andy Kamenetsky, co-host of the Locked On Lakers podcast, a daily podcast covering your favorite team, the Lakers. My brother Brian and I have been covering the Lakers for outlets like ESPN, the LA Times, and the Athletic since 2005. From Kobe, Phil, and Pau to LeBron and Anthony Davis, we are your guide for hopefully watching the Lakers raise banner number 18. We also do not accept any slander of Slava Medvedenko. Listen to the Locked On Lakers podcast every day on the Odyssey app or wherever you get your podcasts.